Welcome to the Qualia Experience Podcast.
Okay, I'm with Dr. Jack Shostak today. Dr. Shostak, you are one of the world's leading researchers in the study of the origin of life, scientifically termed a biogenesis. Earned your PhD in biochemistry from Cornell University and have held distinguished positions at institutions including Harvard Medical School's Department of Genetics and Massachusetts General Hospital Department of Molecular Biology. Today, you serve as professor at the University of Chicago, where you lead the Shostak Lab within the Department of Chemistry and serve as director of the Center for the Origins of Life.
Right.
Your groundbreaking research spans chemical biology, biophysics, organic chemistry, and physical chemistry, with pioneering work in the areas such as the origins of life, non-enzymatic RNA replication, model cells, and the origins of translation. Amongst your 40 plus awards and honors, in 2009, you were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine and the discovery of how chromosomes are protected by telomeres and enzyme telomerase. Dr. Shostak, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here. Pleasure.
If I'm not mistaken, you also serve as an investigator at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. You still serve there?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Such an impressive resume, sir.
Well, thanks. But I really feel I'm very, very fortunate, throughout my career to have been able to work on many very different things and being an investigator of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute has really helped me to, be able to study very different things.
Yeah. Thank you for your work.
Thanks.
I'll start with the most intriguing, fascinating question, at least for me. What is abiogenesis, also known as the origin of life?
Yeah, it's basically just the idea that life emerged from inanimate molecules, right? So to me, it's a fascinating question. How did a bunch of chemicals that aren't alive somehow come together and start acting like a cell that could grow and divide and start to evolve, in a Darwinian sense. So I think that's a huge puzzle, and yes, it's the source of a lot of really different research questions.
Yeah, it opens up the door to a lot of questions. Yeah, and one question will be: at what exact point do you personally believe chemistry becomes biology? Is there like a definable threshold where non-living matter truly becomes alive, or is life more of a gradual continuum?
Yeah, that's a tricky sort of issue.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's
I,
kind of similar to the evolution thing where they ask, where's the skull that moves from ape to man, right?
Yeah, right. And so there's like so many intermediate stages, right?
Yeah.
And I think it actually is similar when you start to look into the earliest beginnings of evolution or the simplest possible cells. Um, it's hard to define exactly where you call something alive. And actually I think different people might draw the line at different points. Some people want to see a system that is more complex internally so that it's less dependent on the environment. For me, the important thing is that the system, it's now a chemical system that can start doing Darwinian evolution. That means it's going to evolve to get more complicated as it adapts to its environment. But even there, when you really zoom in, you see that there's different levels of evolution, right? So if you have RNA molecules that are being copied, or even before they're being copied, some are more stable than others. right? So the population will change based on how stable things are or how they're made. And then when you get into thinking about replication, some sequences are easier to replicate than others. So that's kind of a low level evolutionary process. When you have this replication happening inside protocells, then it becomes a completely different thing. It's more open ended in that you can start to evolve new functions, ribozymes, which are basically enzymes made out of RNA. And then those cells can evolve to become much more complex. So for me, I'm more interested in that whole pathway. And in fact, even more broadly than that, I'm interested in how you go from planet formation to the geological environments on the early Earth, the kinds of chemistry that happened, how that chemistry got more complicated, gave rise to genetic molecules like RNA, eventually protocells, and then those get more complicated. So to me, it's that pathway, that progression that's interesting. And I don't really care where you draw the line in there as to what's alive and not alive. That's not so interesting to me.
And also, like you said, what's the definition of alive? Some people might say, when did consciousness get infused? I guess the continuum is what's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and I think for consciousness, it's a similar thing, it didn't just magically emerge all at once. I mean, if you look at animals, right? From simple animals up to, more complicated animals, and then animals that are really close to us, like chimps and apes. I mean, you see the development of how their brains have developed, how they interact with their environment, you know, emotions and families. There's a long evolutionary history to all of that. And where exactly consciousness emerges or how you define it, it's very,
It's
very
very tricky, yeah.
slippery, very tricky. Yeah,
Yeah,
very.
because they do show rudimentary patterns like we do. Same thing.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
in a more lower level.
Right.
And yeah. Okay. To the second question, what would be the strongest evidence that life could arise from chemistry alone?
I would say the strongest evidence is that we're here. We know there was a point early in the history of our planet when there was no life, right? For sure, after the moon forming impact, the whole Earth was just a molten ball of, red hot rock. And it took
Uh-huh.
probably 100 million years to cool down enough even to have liquid water. Sometime between um, those really early events and, a billion years later, we see a fossil evidence for bacteria like cells. Somewhere in there, life got started. So there was a transition from chemistry to biology.
Where does the primordial soup fit into all of this?
Yeah, that was a really popular concept,
Yeah,
you
that's why I
know,
asked.
50, 70 years ago.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you use that language or it's modified?
no, it's kind of gone out of fashion because it's a kind of misleading concept in a way, right? The primordial soup where you have all the goodies, all the chemicals, right? All the right stuff, and then somehow life emerges from that.
Yeah.
It's kind of, if you really start to think about it, that's impossible. What we're thinking a lot about more these days is that you break the pathway from the simplest starting chemicals, things like cyanide, formaldehyde. They go through some transformations, some simple chemical reactions. You get to a point where you have some stable intermediate chemical that can build up as a reservoir. And then if that reservoir lasts long enough and the right environmental changes happen, maybe the environment changes or those materials, some other materials, then you do the next chemical step, maybe, or maybe two or three steps. And then you make a new material that can, for example, crystallize. And you build up this reservoir of this crystalline material. So, if you do that several times, right, the chemistry is easier to understand, because you're only doing one or two or maybe three steps at a time. And then you sort of pause and build up a reservoir of material. And then if you've done that enough times and with the right chemistry, you have the building blocks of biology, the molecules you really need, which would be the building blocks of RNA and the lipids that would make membranes. Once you have that, then they can come together and you can make protocells that have a membrane with nucleotides and RNA on the inside. But you have to, it doesn't happen all at once. It's like a series of steps.
And you talk about like millions of years, right?
For these steps, probably not. I think the thing that takes a long time is the geology,
The environment, the
the
conditions.
environment, the conditions for the environment. That can take, I mean, just for the planet to cool down, it's probably 100 million years. You know, to make volcanic surface rock environments with lakes and ponds, maybe that occurs on a time scale of millions of years. And then once you have the right environment, the chemistry starts to happen and you start to accumulate materials. Depending on the material, it might be thousands of years, maybe hundreds. The closer you get to biology, right? The more complicated the molecules are, the more reactive they are, the more unstable they are. Things have to happen on a faster and faster time scale. So making the actual molecules you need to build life, maybe that's on a time scale of a year or years. And then to put everything together and start doing replication, now we're talking time scales of maybe days or weeks.
And the way we talk about it now, it comes across like if there's an intelligence to it, like if the earth is
It's the
okay.
laws of chemistry and physics, right? Which are the same everywhere in the universe. And so it's things like chemical stability, how things react, all the physics of forming environments like volcanic regions or impact craters. So it's a lot of complicated
Yeah,
physics,
it is.
chemistry for sure.
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna ask, you probably have to kill me if you tell me the answer to this, but are we close to creating life in the lab?
Okay. All right. This question's a little bit embarrassing because I have been saying that yes, we're close to creating life in the lab. I've been saying that for a long time now. And I still think we're close to creating life in the lab. But whether it's a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, we just have to see. Because, when you're trying to do something complicated like this, you might think, oh, I've got it all figured out. And then you try to put things together and you realize there's a problem you've never thought of before. So um, I think we're close, but we have to actually see.
Okay, hopefully we're around when we get that answer because that'll be
Yes.
fascinating.
Yes. Yes. Right.
Hopefully you will get the answer.
Now I'm getting a little bit older, so I'm feeling the time pressure here to like finish
Oh.
this stuff.
Okay. When you look at a biogenesis from a system perspective, do you think life emerging on Earth was an extremely improbable cosmic accident? Or do you think the universe may naturally tend towards producing life under the right conditions? I think you touched on this earlier.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the big questions, right? Is life inevitable or just incredibly rare? I mean, in the extreme, we might be the only place in the whole universe where there's life. Most people these days, probably because they've watched too much Star Trek, think that there's life everywhere, right? And it's true. We know nowadays. We know that almost every star has planets, right? And Earth-like planets are not that common, but probably, one in 1,000 or maybe one in 10,000 stars have Earth-like planets where life could exist, maybe could get started. And that's a lot of Earth-like planets, even in our galaxy alone. But we don't know, right? We haven't. Well, we won't be able to go there. We're building better and better telescopes, trying to
Yeah.
see signs of life, but we don't
Yeah.
know yet.
Yeah.
And from our work in the lab and all my colleagues who work on this stuff, it seems like the chemistry is not that hard. That's probably not the limiting thing. I think it might be the geology,
Mm.
as I was saying before, building up a reservoir of, compound A, and then it has to get processed and turned into compound B, and then that reservoir has to last and not get eroded away or dissolved, and before it can turn into the next compound C in the pathway. If you have to go through a lot of steps like that, that may be maybe really a rare thing, to get to the end and find the right environment where everything could come together. So that's the big
Yes.
unknown, in my opinion.
Yeah. So the conditions that, if your research comes out to be true, the conditions that made it possible and not in existence, that those have eroded.
Yeah, the conditions on our planet now are completely different from 4 billion years ago when life got started. So there's no way that life could get started on our planet now.
Yeah.
All the building blocks, all the materials, the chemicals you'd use to create life would be food for existing organisms.
Okay. Because
And
I've heard the argument that, yeah, I've heard the argument of if it started that way, why is it not happening now? So that's the answer right there.
yeah, and just think about our atmosphere, right? Our atmosphere has oxygen that we breathe that comes from plants, from photosynthesis. The
Yes.
beginning, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere, so the chemistry that could go on was completely different.
Just a quick sidebar. Do you ever think or imagine that maybe life came to Earth through an external source?
Yeah, that idea, it's still talked about a lot. I think the transport of material between planets in our solar system, we know that happened a lot. It still happens, right? There are Mars rocks on the surface of Earth, right? So, so if life got started on Mars, it could have come to Earth. Um, if Venus was more habitable in the early days when the sun was less bright, maybe life started on Venus and came to Earth. So if I think that's all possible. Having life start somewhere else, like on a planet around another star, and then coming here, I think is much less likely.
Exactly.
It can't rule it out, but it's clear that the journey. Suppose there's an impact, you blast off fragments of rock that have bacteria in them somehow to survive for millions of years through the cosmic radiation that that that's present in the interstellar regions. That seems like a really tall order. So I I, I think that's less likely.
It's likely.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you believe is currently the single biggest missing piece in a biogenesis research? Like the one breakthrough that if solved tomorrow would radically change the field, basically revealing the next frontier.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but it's hard to actually. I don't know that there's one missing piece of information, or I think there's a whole bunch of different things that we need to figure out. There is one thing that I think is for what we're doing in my lab is one of the big problems like that, which is for the membrane, the cell membrane of a primitive cell. Right, we think the easiest way to make that is with just fatty acids. These are the simplest molecules that can form membranes. But those membranes are, they're a little bit delicate and they fall apart in the presence of metal ions like magnesium or calcium. So then you say, okay, well then there has to be an environment where there's not much magnesium in the water. That's a problem because when we're doing our RNA replication, that chemistry requires a lot of magnesium. So there's this compatibility issue. And we have artificial ways of getting around that, but we haven't really found a solution that would make everything compatible and everything able to work together at the same time in a way that's prebiotically realistic. So that's definitely one problem. But there are a lot of other pieces of the puzzle that we need to put together.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. There's a lot of pieces of puzzles all working at the same time to make
Yeah.
within the right conditions too to make it happen.
Yeah, right, exactly. You want to have the and we don't know what the right conditions were, right? I mean,
That's another, yeah.
we don't know very much about the environments on the early Earth. Um, I do think, it's a big planet, right? With I think there would have been lots of different environments, even on the early Earth. There would have been places where it was really hot, places where it was really cold. Or you've got the poles, the equator. It can be high up in a mountain or way down at sea level. Lots of different environments. Um, but we don't really know what the best environment is. An environment that gives you lots of sort of local variations and fluctuations would be a volcanic area, like something like Yellowstone Park is now, which is a fascinating place to go and visit. But even for that, we don't know how common those environments would have been on the early Earth.
Great. Let's move on from the biogenesis.
Okay.
It's really fascinating. I'll have to email you more more on that. I'll move on to biogenesis. I'll let you go ahead and explain what that is.
You mean just the idea that once you have living things that they propagate. So
Yeah,
so
life
life
begets
comes
life.
from life. Right? Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
simply what it is.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and this goes back to the ideas of Louis Pasteur, right? Who's one of the first to really show that if you really sterilize a solution and keep it isolated, you don't see the spontaneous emergence of life. But if you open it up to the air and spores can come in, you see mold and bacteria growing. So yeah, life comes from life. I mean, it's evolved. It's the species that we see around us evolved in order to propagate really effectively.
Okay, cool.
4 billion years ago or so, when there was no life, we have to think about it in a totally different way.
Yeah, like you stated, if biogenesis states that life arises from existing life, which would have confirmation of that, that's a fact. How do scientists like you, Dr.
Yeah.
Shostak, reconcile that principle with biogenesis, which you're an expert in and your research, trying to explain the very first emergence of life from non-living chemicals?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just the fact that we know for sure there was a time when there was no life on our planet, and then sometime later there was life. So something happened in there. Um,
Could
you
there
know,
have been? Could there have been always been life? Is that something that you've?
no, I don't think so. Um, because we know from how this planet was formed, right? By is sort of essentially, starting from as the solar system was first forming, right? There was obviously no life then, and then planets form as they're forming and building up. It goes through huge impacts. You have basically molten rock and high temperatures and no possibility for life. But over a period of millions of years, and things cool down and the conditions get better, and then you start doing the right chemistry. We think that that's what gave rise to life.
The scientists in biogenesis and experts like you in abiogenesis ever have clashes or debates or arguments on this, or are they part of the team and are working in hand with you to see?
Yeah, okay, that's actually a really interesting point. So yeah, we do work together in a sense because if you look at the diversity of life on our planet today, right, and you look at, for example, the biochemistry, like every living cell on the planet uses DNA to code for its information. It gets transcribed into RNA and then translated into proteins, which do most of our biochemistry. Every living cell does this. Now, if you start to look at the sequences, you can trace back in time. You can see how these things evolved over time. And you get to kind of a roadblock at what we call the last universal common ancestor, or LUCA. So that was a, a cell, probably pretty much like bacteria today, some sort of bacterial cell that lived roughly 3.5 or 4 billion years ago, from which everything that's living now is derived. Okay. But Luca was already really complicated. And at the time of Luca, there were many other bacterial species around the planet. And so you can trace back there to the origin of life, to the first cells. And what happened in between the first cells and the complexity of Luca is really interesting because that's when all the complex biochemistry evolved, the process of making proteins, all the complex machinery that goes on in cell membranes, the whole process of metabolism evolved also. And we don't know how long it took to evolve that. Maybe also that could have been millions of years. So, so we have friends in biology who work on trying to understand what the earliest cells looked like, what kinds of biochemistry they have. So that goes back and tells us that the early cells used RNA to do most of their biochemistry. And then from the chemistry, so working from the opposite direction, right? Going from simple chemistry to more complicated chemistry, we build up to get to RNA. So it's kind of in the middle is where the exciting origin of life stuff happened, right? And that depended on molecules like RNA and on simple cell membranes. So it's really very complementary approach.
Yeah, basically working together.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that'll be the best way to get the answers we need.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, this is going to be like an evolutionary science question. What is evolution?
Okay.
Before you answer, I've tried to explain it in different ways to different people, and they always say things like, "So, are we from chimpanzees? Why are there still chimpanzees around?" And I try to explain that no, it's just from the same
Common ancestors.
common ancestry.
It is a little bit hard to understand. I think it's partly because we use the word evolution in a lot of different ways, just like we use the word life to mean a lot of different things. So people talk about physical systems evolving, meaning that they change with time, right? But in biology, evolution has a very different and very specific meaning,
Yeah.
which is that if you have living organisms, if they if they are reproducing and you have um, a system of inheritance, and you can and that and during the reproduction you get some variation which is heritable, and you put that and so those are facts, right? We know that happens, it's inevitable, and you put that together with natural selection, meaning the organisms that reproduce the most successfully. They survive the best, they compete the best, or they cooperate the best, or whatever, they propagate the best, they will take over. And that means that variations that improve the probability of, successfully reproducing, those variations will become more common with time over generations. And over many, many, many generations, that can lead to just enormous, like unbelievable changes, which you see is the tree of life, right? You start from the simplest beginnings and you get to all the incredible complexity that we see all around us. And it's for sure a lot of people have a hard time accepting that billions of years of small incremental changes can lead to all the diversity we see. But it's true.
Is there a way you scientists can change what you call theory? Because colloquially, it doesn't mean what it means in science.
Well, it does. It is a little bit slippery because we might have, say, in physics, a theory to explain why particles move in a certain way. And it can be a completely made up concept, but then you have to test it, right? If you're scientific, you want to test the ideas, test your theory. And eventually, if it really gets proven, we still call it a theory, like the theory of gravitation, right?
Exactly.
But that's a theory that's really been proven.
That's what I'm saying. Now,
Yeah.
why don't we kind of graduate it from theory to some, because
Yeah.
it's still confusing when you
Yeah.
still call
Yeah.
it theory.
Right, it's confusing because we're using the same word really to mean different things, which is a problem with language in general.
Yeah, the germ disease theory, that's a fact.
That's a fact, right?
Gravitational theory, that's a fact.
Right.
Evolutionary theory, that's a fact.
Yeah, but on the other hand, like I have my theory of the origin of life, and it's not proven yet.
That is true too. Yes. So that's
So
that's the confusing part.
yeah.
Do you think our current understanding of evolution is fundamentally complete? Or do you believe future discoveries could expand evolutionary theories in ways as revolutionary as quantum physics expanded classical mechanics?
Yeah, and that's a good question. The basic idea of evolution, of Darwinian evolution, is very simple, right? You can explain it in a couple of sentences. But it's a beautiful theory because it acts on so many different complicated situations. And how evolution proceeds depends on the environment, on the complexity of the organisms, on whether they're, you know, it used to be thought in the early days of thinking about evolution that it was all about competition, right? And whoever won the competition would be
Survival of the fittest.
survival of the fittest. It's in practice, it's much more complicated than that because your probability of survival can be improved by cooperating with other members of your family, like, or your children, or just the people around you in your social group, for example. And exactly how these cooperative processes evolve, it's interesting. People are still studying that. It is a little bit. Uh, well, there are aspects of that in terms of just in terms of quantitatively, like how does it actually work? Does it work on small groups, or can it work on only on the basis of kin selection, like improving survival of relatives? So these are still active areas of research.
And this is basically among same species, right?
Oh, well, yeah, but then you think about the action of evolution in a real world situation, right? We all are interacting with thousands of other species, with pathogens that infect us, other species that that are our food or that compete
Oh,
with
yeah,
us.
that is true.
So all these interactions, that's what evolution has to. That's where evolution has to act, right? In this complicated environment. And that's why evolutionary theory is still something that people are working on and developing because it's not at all obvious how evolution will play out in such complicated environments.
And it's still happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Evolution is still going on.
As long as organisms are reproducing, evolution will be going on.
So we could say evolution beyond Darwin.
Yeah, yeah. Still, it will always be happening.
Before I ask the next question, I'd like to read a brief passage from your book.
Oh,
It's, um, I don't know if I'll call it a passage because I bought it yesterday on audio, an audio book, and I've been listening to it. Is Earth Exceptional? The Quest for Cosmic Life, which you co-wrote with Mario Livio,
mm,
if I hope I got that right.
yeah.
And then this is in chapter 1, a freak chemical accident or a cosmic imperative, audio version. And at 8:25 minutes mark, you state, life, what a concept. Well, the questions of how did life begin and is there extraterrestrial life have enthralled humans since ancient times throughout most of recorded history. Almost everyone believed that the answer to the first question was simple. God created it. Okay. Assuming you're referring to before science and early scientific
Right.
times.
Yeah.
I mean, it still goes on now.
Yeah.
Um, with that said, throughout history, many religious traditions have viewed life as carrying intentionality or deeper meaning beyond biology. Do you think advances in origin of life research challenge this perspective? Or can scientific and spiritual interpretations of existence meaningfully coexist?
So I would say yes and yes. Before the sort of development of modern science, right, people looked at lots of natural phenomena, um, including the existence of other living things, and you just can't understand it, right? So people have a need for an explanation.
For
And the
answers.
easy explanation is, God or gods or supernatural forces. But now we don't have to have that view. We can see that there are natural explanations for all kinds of phenomenon out there. And now we're getting, I think, close to having a good natural explanations for how life got started and evolved into all the organisms we see around us. So there is that scientific perspective, but I wouldn't say that it's um, completely incompatible. I mean, if lots of people believe in different religious traditions, ideas, and that's fine too, right? I mean, you can say, if you believe in God, you could say, well, maybe God created life and this is actually the way he did it by setting things up so that the chemicals would react and get more complicated and form life. Yeah. So, I'm not religious. I look at it just like, we're part of nature, right? Life emerged as a natural phenomenon. All of that chemistry, all of the evolution that's happened ever since is part of nature, and we're all just part of nature, and we should appreciate that and be happy that we're part of nature and therefore also take care of the nature that's around us.
This might be more psychological or philosophical, I don't know, but what do you think is this need to have an answer? Like, I don't know is not sufficient enough for a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Yeah.
Did did we evolve with this need? Because I'm okay with I don't know in
Yeah.
some questions, but some people tend to not be okay with it.
Right,
With
right.
some,
Lots of people have to have an explanation for things. And I think that probably does have a survival value, right? We
need.
evolved, right, to um, yeah, because if things are going on around you that, for example, might be threatening to your survival, you want to understand what's going on. And getting the correct explanation might be impossible at a certain stage. Now we can explain more things. We can't explain everything even now, right? So, but I think an important part of being a scientist is what you said, being willing to say, I don't know the answer. I don't have an explanation, and it's okay. We might try to figure it out. If you're working on a particular puzzle as a scientist, you want to know, but you have to say, okay, I don't know. It's a problem I want to solve. But you have to be comfortable saying, I don't know.
How do your colleagues, because I know, I would guess that some of them are, probably religious. How do they set that aside when they get into the lab?
Yeah, I think, well, some people do it in a reasonable way. They may have religious convictions, but they don't see it as a contradiction to the world of nature and natural laws. Um, but other people just can't accept that life started um, just because of the laws of chemistry and physics, right? They see they see the complexity as being too great for life to emerge all by itself. And okay, they can have that opinion. I have a different opinion. I'll try to show from our work that life actually could emerge from natural phenomena.
All right, I'll step back to a biogenesis for a minute.
Okay.
A biogenesis explains how life may emerge from chemistry, but consciousness introduces another mystery entirely.
Yes.
Here in the Quality Experience podcasts, I always asked all my guests, and I would ask you the same thing in your own words. Define consciousness.
Another very slippery concept and very hard to explain, even though we all know what we mean by it, right?
Yeah, we're all aware.
Yeah, we're all aware. So to me, it's a kind of recursive thing in that we're aware of our surroundings, but we're aware that we're aware of our surroundings. We can internally watch ourselves watching, and that self-awareness to me is the essence of consciousness. And I think how that evolved is a really interesting question in evolution, right? Because very, very, very simple organisms are uh, sense their environment in different ways, by light, by touch, by smell. And as more complex animals evolved, right, you can see that they're becoming more aware of their environment or aware of, threats or potential mates or social interactions. And as you get up to things, organisms as complex as chimps, right? I mean, they're so similar to us, it's almost scary, right? And you see a lot of human traits in how chimpanzees behave. And they even have various rudiments of language, right? They make sounds that mean something. Yeah. So, I think this evolutionary progression needs a lot more study, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the lower you go, the less you see those. You tend to see, like reasoning, logic, emotions.
Right.
You lose all that the lower you go in the hierarchy of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say. It's hard to say where it kicks in, where consciousness kicks in. Can we say that dogs are conscious?
I mean, they're clearly aware of their surroundings, right? But how aware are they of their internal state? How aware are they that they're aware? And I mean, how can you know? It's such a
Yeah.
subjective thing.
And I think that creeps into the next question I'm about to ask you, which is one of the most fascinating aspects of evolution is that it eventually produced beings capable of reflecting
Yeah.
on existence itself.
Right.
So, like us,
Yep.
um, do you think consciousness is simply a byproduct of biology that evolution will eventually explain? Or do you believe it points to something more fundamental about the nature of reality?
Well, I think it's consciousness is a phenomenon. It's an emergent phenomenon. As our brains got more and more and more complex, our our ability both to sense and be aware of the external world. uh, Gradually, we also became increasingly aware of our internal world. And somewhere along that pathway, you have consciousness, but it does seem, when you think about it that way, that it emerged gradually, right? Not all at once, right? It's not,
Yeah.
not like, in all other animals, there
Yeah.
was no consciousness, and all of a sudden there's humans that are conscious. I don't buy that, right? I think it's a gradual emergence.
So you think it emerges from our brains, basically. We produce consciousness.
Yeah, 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 I do.
I'd like to ask this before we go into a rapid fire questions.
Okay.
If life ultimately emerged from non-living chemistry through natural processes,
Yeah.
do you think that changes how humanity should think about meaning, purpose, or our place in the universe?
I basically think, like I said before, we should think of ourselves not as something separate from nature, but as part of nature. And if you take that view, then I think you want to take care of the nature that gave rise to all of us, and not just exploit it or destroy it.
That's I think that's the best way to go to even stay alive ourselves because we need nature and we need the environment and creatures to be able to survive ourselves.
That's right.
So that should be common sense, but it's not the way it's leaning nowadays.
Unfortunately, that is correct. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I've heard an argument. I don't subscribe to it, but it's trying to argue that consciousness is all around and we are like funnels. Our brains kind of contain it for us to be able to be aware of ourselves. So what do you think about that argument?
I mean, it seems very romantic, but yeah, I can't really understand that. Uh, to me, the being able to sense your environment in detail and be aware of it, and then being able to sense your internal state, that's basically neurobiology, right? It's
Yeah.
more interesting to me to think of how does our consciousness and other things like our moral sense, how does that emerge from the evolution of our brains? Uh, so that's something that I can understand.
Yeah, probably more philosophical. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you think even if we finally get answers to the origin of life, humans will still be humans. So it would not change how we treat each other.
Right.
Yeah. Because honestly, I could argue that as the world is, and a lot of people believe in God or something external, they still act like normal. They don't really act like if there
Yeah.
is a God.
Right.
Yeah, it will be the same basically. Nothing would change.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if people accept a more natural explanation, at least some of the ways that people justify violence and
Would change.
war would go away, right? So one would hope that people would behave in a more reasonable and kind way.
That
Maybe
is a
that's too optimistic.
yeah, I was about to say. Now we're moving into into some which area?
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
hopefully.
Well, I guess I am fundamentally optimistic, although these days it is a little hard to always be optimistic.
What do you say? There's another side, but what do you say about the UFO sightings in the news and the government talking about releasing publications? Do you
What
think that has any credit to it?
publications about what?
About UFO sightings.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything real there. There's some like weird, unexplained phenomenon, but there's nothing that comes close to being like actual evidence for aliens visiting the Earth. People like to have these sensationalistic stories, but yeah, I haven't seen anything that's, you know, even close to being convincing.
Yeah, we see a lot of grainy videos though.
Right.
These are rapid fire questions, and we can call this a reflection segment too. Don't think too deeply about these. Um, should be should
I'm sure they're going to be all very deep questions.
should be mostly what comes to mind. Don't think too deep. Okay. After decades of research into the origins of life, what discovery or realization most changed how you view humanity's place in the universe?
So I wouldn't say it's a discovery, but I think just the realization that we can sort of see the outlines of how changes in geology, chemistry could lead to life, and how evolution can explain what's happened since. And that, as I've said several times, makes me think that, yeah, humans, just like other living things and the world around us, we're all part of nature. We're all connected in this way. And so if people think that they're not something apart from nature that can control nature, they actually feel more like they're a part of something, then that should change how people act.
Great take on that. What second one would be, what discovery do you hope humanity makes in the next 50 years?
Hope humanity discovers how to live in peace and harmony and not destroy each other, not blow up the planet, not destroy the world, you know, through climate change or nuclear war.
I join you in that. I join you in that hope. Hopefully that happens even sooner.
Yeah.
What keeps you optimistic?
There are so many good people in the world who are really trying to make the world a better place. And there are so many people who are just curious and want to understand things. And I think those things are the best part of humanity, and that keeps me somewhat optimistic.
Awesome. I like that. What questions keeps you awake at night?
Actually, I sleep pretty well.
With all these concerns you just listed, you, you go ahead and tell me you sleep very well.
Yeah, but you could stay awake all night worrying about things, but it doesn't change anything. So there's no point to doing that.
So nothing keeps you awake at night. You go home and you go to
I fell asleep right away. Yeah.
hey, great answer. I like that. Okay. End of the rapid question segment. I like to share your books and co-authored works with the audience. The Origins of Life, published in 2010 alongside David W. Dima.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a very technical book. It's very technical, and a lot of it is outdated, and we were the editors, actually. Other people wrote all the chapters, so,
oh, okay.
unless you wanna really get into the nitty-gritty, that's
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Because like I said, it compiles foundational research into how life began on earlier. And then we have Is Life Exceptional? The Quest for Cosmic Life, which you published in 2024, written with astrophysicist Mario Livio. And it explores the Drake equation, the origins of life, and the likelihood of finding cosmic life in other intelligent beings.
Yeah.
How,
It was
but
fun writing the book with Mario. He's a great, astrophysicist. So he gave a complementary perspective on these problems.
yeah,
Fun.
yeah. So I just got introduced to him through your work, so I'll try to like look into him more and explore his work too. Um, I believe both books are available on Amazon, and if not, a quick online search should help people find them and discover other publications by you, because you have a ton of publications. And I was doing a research in you, and I'm like, okay, I'll just take the two books that I'm aware of and go with that.
Yeah, I
I
also have a lot of videos on YouTube.
Yes, I watched one of them before we came on. Interesting. Yeah. And I personally, like I said, I bought the Is Earth Exceptional? A
Yep.
Quest for Cosmic Life, the audio version, and I'm about 8 hours in now. I think. I listened most of the day yesterday, and I'm really enjoying it.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, really enjoying it. The extraterrestrial aspect of it. And you talked about the conditions and how earlier scientists stumbled into discoveries, and it touches a lot of areas, which is very fascinating. Just not the origin of life, and hopefully I be get done with it by this weekend. Have some time off, and I'll email you.
You reminded me of something I should have said earlier. You asked me, what would be, like, one discovery that would completely change how we think about things in terms of the origin of life?
Yeah.
And that is, if we discover evidence for life on an exoplanet, right, a planet around another star, that would almost certainly be an independent origin of life. That would mean life emerged at least 2 times, right? That means it can't be that hard. right? It's not a once for all time rare event. So that would totally change how we view the origin of life. And it would say it would help us because we would know that all the things we're studying, all these pathways, the end result has to be some reasonable probability. So we're going to be waiting for our astronomer friends to, get
All hands on
get
deck.
to work and find signs of life out there.
Everybody has to be working. It's all hands on deck to get that solution.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Last thing before we go, even though it comes nearly 2 decades late, I still like to sincerely congratulate you on receiving the 2009 Nobel Prize Award.
Yeah.
Your contributions have not only advanced science, but have also profoundly shaped humanity's understanding of life itself. Thank you again, Dr. Shostak, for joining us today and for sharing your time, insights, and remarkable perspective with us.
Thank
Hopefully,
you very much.
thank you. And hopefully, this will be the first of many more conversations to come. I look forward to
Yep.
talking to you again.
It was great talking to you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Qualia Experience podcast. How did life begin? From chemistry to biology. A huge thank you to Dr. Shostak for sharing his knowledge, insights, and decades of groundbreaking research with us. And thanks to you, our listeners, for spending your time exploring these big questions alongside us. Be sure to follow, rate, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious, and thank you for being part of the Qualia Experience journey.